You ever hit that point in life where you look around and realize, hold on now, it's just me out here. No folks calling, no friends checking in, no invitations, no plans, nothing. Just you, your thoughts, and the uncomfortable silence of your own life. And let me tell you something. That moment right there, that's either the start of your breakdown or the beginning of your breakthrough. See, a lot of people run from that feeling, but I want you to stay right here with me because what I'm about to share can change the way you see yourself, your relationships, and your entire future. And if you walk away before this speech is over, you might miss the one thing you needed to hear to shift your whole situation. When you have no friends, something happens that most people never pause long enough to notice. You finally meet the real you. Not the version of yourself that shows up for others, not the version that adjusts to fit into a group, and not the version that performs just to keep peace. When you're alone, stripped from the noise of other people's expectations, opinions, or judgments, you get introduced to the part of yourself you've been carrying all along but never paid attention to. And it's uncomfortable because silence is where truth lives. When the calls stop coming, when the social circles dry up, and when the distractions fade, you're left with the raw, unfiltered version of your life. Depending on how prepared you are to face that reality, it can either shake you or shape you. The reason isolation stings is because it forces a mirror in front of your face, and not the flattering mirror that makes you look good. I'm talking about the mirror that shows your habits, your patterns, your attitudes, and even the things you've been avoiding for years. When you have people around you all the time, it's easy to blame them for your problems or hide behind the noise. But when you're alone, the excuses start running out. You start asking bigger questions. Why am I where I am? What choices brought me here? What do I really want? What part of my life have I been pretending is fine when it's really not? And that level of honesty hurts at first. It exposes things you didn't want to see. Maybe you realize that some friendships didn't end because people were fake, but because you weren't showing up as your best self. Maybe you noticed that you've been carrying unresolved anger, insecurity, or fear that pushed people away. Or maybe you realize that you never learned how to let people in to begin with, so relationships were always built on shaky ground. The revelation is never meant to shame you. It's meant to free you, but you can't fix what you won't face. And when the room gets quiet and you finally hear your own thoughts, that's when the real work begins. One of the most powerful things about having no friends is that your identity stops being defined by your environment. When you're always surrounded by people, you naturally adapt. You play certain roles, you adjust your personality to fit the room, you compromise parts of yourself just to belong. You become a version of yourself that's shaped by the group instead of shaped by your truth. But isolation removes the audience, and without an audience, you stop performing. For the first time, you're not trying to impress anybody, not trying to prove anything, not trying to keep up with people who don't even know who you really are. You start realizing which parts of your personality are genuinely you and which parts were just survival strategies. Maybe you always acted tough because the people you hung around only respected toughness. Maybe you always acted funny because humor was the only way you felt accepted. Maybe you were always the listener because deep down you didn't think your voice mattered. But when you're alone, the masks fall off. There's nobody to applaud them, nobody to benefit from them, nobody to react to them. It's just you face to face with the truth that most of your life has been shaped by what you needed other people to think. And once you realize that, you gain the power to change it. Loneliness creates a space where your real identity can finally breathe. You begin to discover what you actually enjoy, not what you pretended to enjoy, what you actually believe, not what you repeated from people you wanted acceptance from, what you actually want from life, not what you thought you were supposed to want because everyone else did. In that quiet space, you begin sorting through the emotional clutter you've collected over the years. You may uncover wounds from childhood you never addressed. You might realize you've been operating with a low sense of self-worth that made you tolerate friendships that were draining you instead of building you. You might notice how often you talk yourself out of opportunities because somewhere along the line, someone made you believe you weren't enough. And once you start noticing these things, something shifts. You become aware, and awareness is the beginning of transformation. You start listening to your own needs, maybe for the first time ever. You start hearing the thoughts that have been buried under years of noise. You notice your habits with more clarity. You see the patterns that keep repeating. And slowly, you begin to understand why certain friendships didn't last, why you felt disconnected around people, why relationships drained you more than they filled you. You begin to understand your emotional wiring. When you understand yourself, you can finally start growing yourself. The solitude gives you space to improve without judgment. You can work on your weaknesses privately. You can rebuild your confidence without worrying about who notices. You can develop new habits, break old ones, forgive yourself, heal, and grow without anyone watching or questioning the process. And this growth is different because it's not for show. You're not trying to become better so people will accept you. You're becoming better because you finally see yourself clearly enough to know you deserve to grow. People often misunderstand loneliness. They think it means something is wrong with them. But loneliness is often just the absence of distraction. And in the absence of distraction, the truth can finally speak. You begin to accept yourself instead of waiting for someone else to validate you. You begin to enjoy your own company instead of needing constant attention. You begin to understand that relationships aren't supposed to complete you. They're supposed to complement you. And that realization changes everything. Because once you become comfortable with who you are alone, you stop tolerating what doesn't align with who you are becoming. You stop chasing approval. You stop forcing connections. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into places you've outgrown. You stop allowing people to treat you in ways that dishonor your worth. You start demanding more, not from others, but from yourself. And ironically, once you reach that point, once you truly know yourself, accept yourself, and start improving yourself, people notice. The right people, because identity attracts identity. Clarity attracts clarity. Growth attracts growth. But before any of that, you have to face the silence. You have to walk through the loneliness. You have to meet the version of yourself you've been avoiding. And even though that process is uncomfortable, painful, awkward, and humbling, something powerful happens on the other side of it. You step into a level of self-awareness that makes you stronger, wiser, and more grounded than you've ever been. And because of that, the friendships you build afterward will be healthier, deeper, and more genuine than anything you've had before. And the surprising thing is, once you truly meet the real you, you never settle for the old version again. And that is where the journey quietly begins to shift into something you never expected, something you might not even recognize at first, something that starts forming inside you long before you see it reflected in your life. Something that grows in the silence and prepares you for the kind of connections you didn't even know you were capable of having. Something that takes root in the very season you once thought was the most empty part of your life and slowly reveals itself as the most important, because it's the moment you finally begin to see yourself without filters, without noise, without performance, and without the borrowed expectations of the world around you. And in that discovery, you begin to realize that the absence of friends was never the punishment you thought it was, but the doorway you never knew you needed, because it led you back to the version of yourself you were always supposed to meet, but somehow kept missing every time the world grew loud and crowded and full of everyone else's voices except your own. And once you hear that voice clearly, once you sit with it long enough, once you begin to trust it, everything about who you become later starts quietly taking shape right there in that solitude where the real work begins and where the real you finally starts to emerge unfinished. When isolation settles into your life, it doesn't arrive politely. It doesn't knock on the door and wait to be invited in. It walks straight in, sits down in the middle of everything you thought was comfortable, and dares you to face the one thing you've been avoiding, yourself. Isolation has a way of stripping life down to its essentials. No people to distract you, no conversations to hide inside, no noise to drown out the thoughts running through your mind. And at first, it feels like punishment. It feels like you've been abandoned, pushed aside, forgotten. But what if the very thing you're calling loneliness is the exact environment required for your next level of growth? What if isolation isn't rejection, it's preparation? What if being alone isn't a setback, it's the setup? There are certain transformations that can only happen in silence, certain breakthroughs that can only form when everything around you stops moving. People rarely realize it, but some of the greatest growth comes in the moments when you feel most alone, when the phone doesn't ring, when the invitations stop, when the circle falls apart, when the familiar world you built suddenly collapses. That's when the ground beneath you begins to shift. You start to question who you are without the roles you played for others. You begin to see how much of your identity was shaped by the people around you. And when those people disappear, you're left standing in a space big enough for transformation. The quiet creates an atmosphere where your mind starts working differently. You begin to see possibilities instead of patterns. You begin to see the future instead of the past. You start to realize that the things you thought you lost were making room for the things you actually needed. Isolation forces you to think bigger because there's nothing left to hold on to. It becomes a season where every doubt, every weakness, every fear rises to the surface, not to destroy you, but to be dealt with. You notice the parts of yourself that were hidden behind companionship, the parts that went unchallenged because people around you were comfortable with your comfort. And now that you have no one to lean on, you find yourself having to stand on your own strength, even if your legs shake the entire time. There is something powerful about having to push through life without an audience. When you grow in public, people cheer. When you grow in isolation, no one sees the sweat, the struggle, or the nights when you almost gave up. But that's where elevation is born. Not in applause, but in solitude. You start learning how to motivate yourself when nobody is watching. You start developing discipline because there's no one there to hold you accountable. You strengthen your mind because you have to face the voices inside your head without escape routes. It's in these moments that you begin to rise, not visibly, but internally. The world won't notice it yet. People won't see how much stronger you're becoming. They won't see the new habits forming, the new mindset building, the new resilience taking shape, but you will feel it. You will feel the shift inside you. You will feel a new fire, a new focus, a new drive. That's what isolation does. It introduces you to the version of yourself you didn't know existed, the version that doesn't quit, the version that doesn't rely on validation, the version that doesn't need a crowd to believe in their purpose. When you're stripped of company, you're forced to develop character. When people walk away, you're forced to deepen your relationship with your own strength. And in that process, something unexpected happens. You start realizing that the silence isn't empty. It's full of potential. It's full of lessons you never learned when you were surrounded by noise. It's full of opportunities to become sharper, wiser, stronger, more focused. You begin to understand that isolation is not the absence of something, but the presence of something greater. It's the environment where clarity is born. You start hearing thoughts that were drowned out for years. Ideas that never had space now rise to the surface. Dreams you buried come back to life because there's finally room for them to breathe. You start seeing patterns in yourself that were holding you back. Maybe you always depended on others to feel happy. Maybe you built your confidence on external approval. Maybe you allowed certain friendships to weaken your ambition. Maybe you stayed in circles that didn't push you to grow because comfort felt easier than change. Isolation removes the comfort and forces the change. You begin to see that elevation requires separation, not because people were bad for you, but because growth needed room. The next version of you needed silence to speak. The next chapter of your life needed solitude to be written. And as you continue walking through this quiet season, you start to feel the shift in your identity. You're not as emotionally reactive. You're not as easily discouraged. You're not as desperate for connection. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to believe in your own decisions. You begin to appreciate your own company. And with that, Something powerful begins to happen. Your standards rise. You stop allowing people to treat you however they want. You stop accepting friendships that drain your energy. You stop chasing relationships that only make you feel more alone. You stop settling for environments that suffocate your growth. Isolation teaches you what you truly deserve. It teaches you that loneliness is better than fake companionship. It teaches you that peace is more valuable than popularity. It teaches you that your purpose is worth protecting, even if it means standing alone for a while. And as you grow in this quiet season, life begins aligning itself in ways you didn't expect. Opportunities open up because you finally cleared the noise. New ideas form because your mind isn't cluttered with other people's opinions. Your inner strength grows so much that things that used to break you now barely shake you. You begin walking differently, thinking differently, choosing differently. Not because someone changed you, but because isolation polished you. The world will eventually see the transformation, but you will always know where it began. It didn't begin in a crowd, in a friendship, in a relationship, or in some loud moment of revelation. It began when you were alone in a quiet room with nothing but your thoughts and the uncomfortable truth that you had no one left to turn to but yourself. And somewhere in that silence, somewhere in the middle of all that stillness, somewhere in the space where you thought you were falling apart, you were actually being rebuilt stronger than ever, shaped into a version of yourself that only isolation had the power to reveal, a version prepared for heights you weren't ready for, back when you were surrounded by the comfort of familiarity, a version that grows roots so deep that the next storm you face won't be able to move you the way the last one did because something inside you has changed in ways too deep for words and too profound for the world to understand until the results finally speak for you. Quickly, that not every smile is genuine, not every crowd is a community, and not every person standing beside you is standing for you. And from that painful truth comes an even deeper wisdom. Real connections are rare, precious, and worth protecting. You begin to see that friendship isn't about quantity anymore, it's about quality. You no longer desire a long list of people around you just to feel important or validated. You start craving something different, something real, something honest, something that doesn't drain your soul but restores it. You start looking for people who make you better, not people who just make you busy. And this shift doesn't happen overnight. It grows slowly, like a lesson life keeps repeating until you finally understand it. At first, you don't even realize how much emotional weight you used to carry by trying to be accepted by the wrong people. You don't notice how much you bent yourself just to fit in, or how much you allowed yourself to shrink to stay in rooms that didn't appreciate your presence. But once those rooms empty, once those people fade out of your life, you suddenly have enough distance to see things clearly. You begin to understand that most of what you called friendship was really convenience. You weren't valued, you were useful, you weren't celebrated, you were tolerated. You weren't surrounded by love, you were surrounded by noise. And noise is very good at pretending to be support. Noise is good at making you feel less alone while keeping you completely unseen. But when you step away from noise long enough, you start craving depth. Start craving people who talk about real things, people who challenge you to grow, people who want to see you win even when your win doesn't benefit them. You start looking for energy that matches yours, not drains it. You begin to measure people not by how long you've known them, but by how they treat you, how they speak to you, how they speak about you when you're not around. You start noticing the difference between people who check on you and people who check up on you out of curiosity, between people who genuinely care and people who just want access, between people who show up in your storms and people who only like you when the sun is out. And the deeper you go into this understanding, the more you realize that real connections aren't something you can chase. They're something you attract. And you attract them by becoming someone who values authenticity over popularity, honesty over entertainment, truth over comfort. You attract them by healing the parts of yourself that used to settle for less. Because when you're broken, you bond with brokenness. When you're insecure, you bond with people who reinforce your insecurity. When you're unsure of your worth, You bond with people who benefit from you not knowing your value. But when you grow, truly grow, your spirit starts rejecting anything that isn't good for you. Conversations that once fascinated you now feel empty. Friend groups that once felt exciting now feel draining. People who once felt familiar now feel foreign. You realize the version of you who tolerated shallow connections doesn't exist anymore. And because of that, your life starts attracting a new kind of person. People who notice your growth. People who appreciate your presence instead of exploiting it. People who don't get intimidated by your strength, but inspired by it. People who don't withhold encouragement out of jealousy. People who clap for you even when their own life is quiet. People who love you without conditions, pride, ego, or hidden motives. The older you get, the more you value this kind of connection. You start understanding that real friends don't have to be many. They just have to be real. You begin to admire the peace that comes with genuine relationships. You appreciate the comfort of knowing you can be honest without being judged. You appreciate the rare feeling of being understood without having to explain every part of yourself. And when you meet people like that, you feel it. The energy is different. The conversation is different. The trust builds naturally. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to shrink. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to question their loyalty every time life gets difficult. You don't have to beg for the respect you deserve. Real connections bring ease. They bring safety. They bring clarity. They push you forward. They help you become a better man, not a smaller one. They show you parts of yourself you couldn't see alone. They challenge you when you need accountability and comfort you when you need support. And once you experience that, once you feel what it's like to be surrounded by people who genuinely care, you never go back to accepting the bare minimum. You will not allow disrespect disguised as friendship. You will not tolerate being used, drained, or manipulated. You will not keep people around out of nostalgia or fear of being alone. You will not settle for connections that cost your peace. You reach a point where you would rather stand alone with dignity than stand in a crowd without identity. You discover that solitude with purpose is better than company without meaning. You realize that life isn't about how many people you know. It's about how many people truly know you. You recognize that being alone is not the worst thing. Being surrounded by the wrong people is. You begin protecting your energy because you understand how expensive it is. You begin listening to your intuition because it never lied to you. You just silenced it for too long. You begin setting boundaries because you finally believe you deserve to be treated with love, respect, and honesty. And as these realizations deepen, so does your appreciation for the rare souls who love you the right way. They become sacred to you, not because you're desperate for connection, but because you finally understand what connection really means. It means loyalty without hidden agendas. It means honesty without cruelty. It means presence without expecting something in return. It means growing together instead of competing. It means giving without keeping score. It means loving without pretending. It means being seen, heard, valued, and respected in ways you didn't even know you needed during the seasons when you had no one. And the most powerful revelation of all is that real connections are not found. They are revealed. They appear when you become the version of yourself that no longer fears loneliness, that no longer chases approval, that no longer attaches your worth to how many people stand beside you, that no longer gives your heart away to people who haven't earned the privilege, that no longer sacrifices your peace just so you won't feel alone for a moment, that no longer confuses attention with affection, and that no longer feels obligated to keep relationships that do not feed your soul. At the end of it all, being a man with no friends teaches you something most people never discover in a lifetime. It teaches you who you are when no one is watching, who you can become when no one is clapping, and who you deserve to stand beside when life finally elevates you. It teaches you the truth about yourself, the truth about others, and the truth about the journey you're meant to take. Loneliness becomes the class where you learn self-awareness. Isolation becomes the ground where you grow your strength. And understanding the value of real connections becomes the wisdom that guides the rest of your life. Because once you've walked through a season where you had absolutely nobody, you learn to appreciate the power of having even one real person who stands with you. You learn that it's not about the crowd. It's about the character of the few who choose you for who you really are. You learn that silence doesn't break you, it builds you. You learn that solitude doesn't weaken you, it reveals you. And you learn that the right connections aren't found by accident. They're found by becoming someone who respects themselves enough to wait for what's real. So if you're sitting in that season right now, if you feel alone, overlooked, isolated, or forgotten, hear me, this is not the end of your story. This is the part where you grow roots so deep that no storm can pull you out again. This is the part where you evolve into the kind of person who attracts real love, real loyalty, real friendship, and real purpose. This season is shaping you into something stronger than you ever imagined. And when you finally step out of it, when the right people find you, when the right doors open, when the right connections form, you will look back and realize something powerful. You were never being punished. You were being prepared.